Welcome to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I have a project that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and that is to make Dream's helmet from the amazing comic book series, The Sandman. Now, the thing that's awesome about this particular helmet is that it's extremely iconic, but almost every artist that depicted it in the series drew it different every single time. So I figured if I'm building it, I might as well do the exact same thing. So I took a bunch of different references from the comic book, and I kind of picked and chose things that I really liked about it. I also took some references from the new live-action Netflix series, and I put all those together to make my own version. Now, this helmet is made completely out of my HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And for those of you that are brand new to the channel, that is a fantastic way to help support me, is to buy some HD foam and go through those links that are in the description section and those that are on my website. Now, just like a bunch of my other builds, this has free PDF files available over on my website in case you would like to build your own. Now, it's a little more difficult than some of my other projects. I'm not going to say that it's Chainsaw Man level difficulty, but it is harder than some of the simple masks, so keep that in mind. And because of that, I actually broke this project up into two videos. So part one is going to go all over the fabrication of this particular helmet. Part two is going to go all over the painting and weathering, because I feel there's a lot that needs to be done to this, and I just wanted it to have its own separate video so you can see all those techniques, and I'm not having to like speed it up just to make a shorter video. I can really dive into there and show you all the things I'm going to do to make this look amazing. So I want to show you what it takes to put Morpheus's helmet together. Let's go ahead and get started. After I'd located my references, I started by taking part A and transferring that onto some 6mm foam 2 times. These two sections are going to be glued together up the middle using some weldwood contact cement. Now, if your seam here isn't perfect, don't worry about that, because I'm going to cover it up with a small strip of foam later on. The two strips on either side are marked and glued into place. This is going to give our helmet its overall shape. To start the eyes, I'm going to trace and cut out part B onto some 6mm foam 2 times. I rough cut the center of this piece with my hobby knife and then clean it up using my rotary tool. Part C can then be transferred and cut out of 4mm foam. Now, when gluing part B and C together, I give them a slight curve. This is important because if it's completely flat, it won't sit properly on the helmet. Part D is also traced and cut out of some 4mm foam 2 times. Just like the other pieces, when gluing part D, it'll have a slight curve to the front to match the shape of the helmet. The eye hole can be rough cut, and notice how I sand the interior. I got some plastic Easter eggs from Walmart, and this is what I'm going to use for the eyes. Having the slight angle on the backside of the foam will allow the egg to sit properly. To give the back of the helmet its proper shape, I glue a small strip of 4mm foam to the inside. This is just tacked into place right now because it's going to be removed later on. Now I can line up the eyes on either side. I'm going to start by just gluing in the corner and then working my way around the perimeter. I don't add adhesive to the entire surface because I'm going to remove some of the foam on the inside. Here you can see what it looks like on the inside because I'm just building this as I go. I really like the raised panel from the comic books, so I'm going to take part E and transfer and cut that out of some 6mm foam. I do a quick sand and heat seal before I move on. This piece is going to slightly overlap onto part A and D and is glued into place using some super glue. Part F is also cut out of some 6mm foam 2 times. This piece is glued to the front, and then I trim away some excess foam on the side of the helmet. The main thing I'm trying to do here is make sure the two pieces line up in the middle at the top. Now I'm going to cut a bunch of small strips of 1mm foam. If you don't have 1mm, 2mm can work here as well. These strips are going to be glued along the perimeter of part F. I use a tongue depressor as a spacer for the detail strips along the sides. Notice how the bottom of each one of these sections has to be slightly tilted to give it the correct look. If you didn't want to go to all this trouble, you could leave part F as it is and add some fake rivets later on. For the nose section, I'm going to transfer part G onto some 10mm foam. Two pieces of the 10mm foam are glued together and cut out to make up the main body. It wasn't quite thick enough, so I glue one more piece to the front. The very front of this nose section is going to be rounded over using my rotary tool. Also notice that I sanded down a very slight angle to the front piece. This nose section is going to be wrapped with a couple strips of foam, one 4mm and one 6mm. Each one is about 3/4 of an inch wide. Notice how these strips are closer together at the bottom than they are at the top. Before I glue the nose on, I want to cover my central seam, and I do that with a strip of 1mm foam. Now the nose can be glued into place, and I start by gluing the bridge of the nose onto the helmet. The two-part F pieces can now be glued to either side of the nose. I got several of these hole punches off of Amazon, and they work great for making fake rivets of different sizes. For this build, I've got 3 sizes cut out of 2mm foam. These foam rivets are placed approximately 3/4 of an inch apart along part E. Now here I use 2 different sizes of rivets. The first 9 are slightly smaller than the back 10. I can now use my template to mark the placement of the rivets around part B. These rivets are slightly smaller than either one that I'd used on part E. Now I'm going to add another group of rivets along the perimeter of part C and part D. These are going to be the smallest rivets that I use on the build. Now if you don't have some hole punches like this for your foam, you could also use some googly eyes. For the spine on the front, I create some custom vertebrae templates and I transfer that onto some 10mm foam. 2 pieces for the larger section are glued together, and then the smaller section is glued on top. So the layering of each vertebrae will be 3 pieces of 10mm foam. Once the pieces have been glued together, I can then take my rotary tool and give them an organic look. I'm pretty happy with how these turned out, so I took my template and I scanned it into the computer. Now I have sections 1 through 9, each one being 95% smaller than the last. Now for each section, I'll also have a separate template for the pieces that will go in between. Pieces 1 through 9 are also transferred onto some 10mm foam and can be cut out. Sections 1 through 4 need to be sanded with a slight angle to the back. That's going to give this spine a curve. Once I'm happy with the overall shape and curve, I can start gluing these pieces together with some super glue. Sections 5 through 9 need to be angled the opposite way to even the spine out. Now I know this is a ton of work for one part of the helmet, but when done right, it really looks good. Once I'm happy with the overall fit, I glue the spine to the front of the helmet using my double adhesive method of contact cement and super glue. Now I can start working on the skull section of the helmet. I'm going to take part H and transfer that onto some 10mm foam. To mirror the image on either side, I'm going to tack two pieces together before I cut them out. This same technique is also going to be used for part I, but this time on some 6mm foam. Here you can see how the skull section is going to lay underneath of the helmet. Before being glued into place, I sand these sections to give them an organic look. I trace and glue part H to the inside of the helmet. Now notice there's still a small 6mm gap. That's for part I. Part I can also be traced on and glued into place. Now that I see the two pieces together, I take my rotary tool and I rough them up a bit more on the front and the back. To fill out the rest of this section, I take part J and transfer that onto some 6mm foam. This is also roughed up before being glued down. With all this in place, I can now glue the front section of part H to the back of part G. Just for some additional stability, I glue some small strips of 2mm foam to both pieces. Now I gotta figure out the back of the skull, so I'm going to take part K and transfer that onto some 10mm foam 2 times. Notice here my base shape doesn't match the PDF template. This is kind of how I do my prototypes and then I refine it for you guys. So after it's glued together and I know that the overall shape works, that's when I go and I draw and cut the final version, and then I transfer that to my final templates. Just like the front and sides of the skull, this back section is also sanded and distressed. With everything glued together, I no longer need this support strip, so I go ahead and remove that to make way for the back of the skull. The middle of part K is glued into place, and then I can cut and remove additional foam from part H so that it fits properly. Once I'm okay with the fit, the sides of the skull can then be glued into place. Now I just need to create the final section for the back of the skull. Part L is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam, and you can see how it's going to fit right underneath of part K. But to get a better fit, the top of this piece needs to be angled, and I'm going to do that with my rotary tool. So with this piece distressed, part L can now be glued to the back side of the helmet. Now you can see there's a pretty big difference between these two sections, and just like the jaw, I'm going to take my rotary tool and sand them down quite a bit. I also take this opportunity to sand the back of the cranium to give it an additional detail, and I'd like this piece to curve up into the inside of the helmet. Just like you've seen me do before, I'm going to cut a small strip of 2mm foam and glue it into place just to make sure this piece keeps its shape. Now here's where it starts to get fun. To get a really organic look, I'm going to be utilizing some foam clay. So for all the seams on the skull sections, I'm going to soften that transition by wetting the foam and then adding some foam clay. Now for those that haven't used it, foam clay is an air dry material. It's easy to sculpt with, you can use your fingers or sculpting tools, and after you're done sculpting, just let it sit for 24 to 48 hours so it skins over. Now in the beginning, foam clay will be soft, but after about a month, the moisture will wick out and this stuff will become rock hard. This same technique is also applied to the back of the skull, but here I'm using some silicone tip tools. I also use some foam clay on the inside as well, just in case anyone ever sees it. Now because the vertebrae is made up of multiple layers of 10mm foam, if you have seams, this is a great way to hide them. Now, one thing with foam clay, before it fully cures, you can distort it, so I hang the helmet up so I can work on the underside. After 24 hours, the foam clay is cured enough that I can start to sand it. And this stuff sands fantastic, especially with a sanding sponge. I'm just trying to knock down some of the high points to give it a smoother appearance. To texture the metal part of the helmet, I'm going to be doing the tinfoil technique. This consists of heating up the foam and then pressing tinfoil into it to emboss the surface. And if you go too deep or add too much, you can always go back with a heat gun to soften the details. For some additional texture on the bones, I'm going to be using a wire brush. This tool is going to be used to scratch the surface, but also pounding it into the foam will give it those minute holes that you see in a lot of bones. I mean, you can see in a harsh light just how great that came out. I also go back and use the tinfoil ball to rough up some areas. So you all can see the steps that I took to put together my own version of the Sandman's helmet. And again, if you'd like to build one, I have free PDF files over on my website that you can download and build right along with me. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing some HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I want to see your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best HD foam.